Hey everyone, so today we're out here at Gabe Garrison's place and we're going to talk a little bit about more trimming and shoeing the horse, but especially that reining horse and that Western performance horse. And so with me, JD Downs, I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit, tell you about his background, but very fortunate to be with him today and learn a lot, and he'll kind of talk a little bit about what he's doing throughout the trimming and shoeing process on a horse, but really some contrasts and differences between that show jumper that we looked at. So JD?
Hello everybody, thanks for coming virtually to our demonstration. I'm a certified journeyman farrier. I'm actually one of the few certified journeyman farriers that works on reining horses. Most of the journeyman farriers work on hunter jumpers, so I do like to incorporate a lot of that certification and those types of foraging skills in shoeing the horse. But Western riding and Western disciplines tend to use different materials, and including aluminum and sliders, which you know, across different disciplines is going to be different. So we're going to go over some foot prep and materials and other types of shoes that help the horse do its job and do its job the best it can, as well as staying sound. Those are all things that are important in
That's great. And as we go through, once we get done with half the horse, we'll take a little break. We'll go look at Gabe riding in the arena and kind of have him talk about what he's looking for from a shoeing aspect and while he's riding. And then we'll come back and do the rest of the horse. And so with that, let's go ahead and get going.
All right, thanks. All right, so we're going to start with the different types of shoes and materials we use. I've been shoeing reining horses for over a decade, and they're incredible athletes. They've just really excited me when I started riding horses. And so anyway, we'll go into the sliders. The sliders go on the hind feet. They're going to be made of even a hardened steel or just a mild steel. This comes without holes, so I can modify the shoe. I can shape the shoe a little bit, but I can put the nail holes that are safe for each individual horse. That's kind of a customization. So I can fit the slider to help the slide, but I can also nail it up safely on each different size of foot. Then we're going to go to the front feet. The front feet are going to be an aluminum shoe. The reason I tend to use these if I have to shoe a horse up front for reining is, number one, they're very porous, so they're going to add a lot of traction and slick ground. Most of our ground, like Oklahoma City, Texas, even some of the California arenas, are going to have a silty feel to the arenas. So those can be very slick. So when horses are doing circles, and you'll see that with Gabe later on, they're going to need that purchase or that traction as they're going around circles. You'll see a lot of horses slip and fall out of lead, and that's going to be a big deduction when it comes to scoring a reining horse. So we're going to help that horse do circles with traction in the front end. A lot of people prefer barefoot. This is as close to barefoot as we can get.
Cool. Do you notice quite a bit quicker wear with the aluminum over the steel, or not too bad in your shoeing period?
Definitely. These are going to have a steel wear plate.
Okay.
So they are going to wear back. I kind of equate it to a barefoot, where as the foot grows out, they're going to continue to wear that toe off, so it's going to feel as natural to the horse. Gives them a nice even breakover. You'll see it used on track horses as well. And so they'll add a steel wear plate to help with that wear.
Cool. Looks good.
Thank you. All right, we're back. We're gonna go over foot prep, meaning trimming the feet. Across all disciplines, we want to basically take off what's dead or impeding breakover, things like that are on the foot that we need to create balance. So we're gonna evaluate the foot first from the top. So as we approach the horse, I'm gonna look at this horse. This happens to be my horse, so I have an idea of her conformation. I'm gonna look at her hoof pastern angles. And then as I pick up the foot, I'm gonna evaluate my depth. As I pick up the foot, I'm always gonna look at level. And by meaning level, just a two-dimensional kind of a T-square. I wanna see if this horse is growing high on the outside or high on the inside. I try to keep it simple in my mind as I'm picking up a foot. And I always do it initially, because once I start going over and picking up the foot, I'm going to pick it up this way or off to the side. I don't like to influence the balance. I just want the horse to naturally pick it up. And so I take a quick view with her lifting the foot. She likes to grow a little high on the outside.
Okay.
So I look at that, yep, it's gonna be the same, it's gonna be hind and outside. As I clean the feet, is when I evaluate my depth along the commissure. The commissure tends to be the closest place to the coffin bone. It's gonna tell me basically how much sole I have, and then I'm gonna work my way to the outer hoof wall, and that'll tell me how much depth. So what I want to try to create is, if I have long heels, I'm going to try to trim the heel back. If I have a long toe, I'm going to try to trim the heel down. I just try to evaluate each kind of foot and horse individually, and then I'm going to shoe the horse to help it with its job. I think balance is important across all disciplines. So I've got a little bit of toe to take, but I've got quite a bit more heel. This particular horse, like a lot of reining horses, like to grow a lot of heel. They tend to be a little more upright, sometimes clubbier footed, at least on one foot or the other. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I consider excess to be negative. So I don't want it to get too long, but I also don't want to trim the heel completely off. And I don't want my sole to be excessive. That can put pressure around the coffin bone area. So I'm just taking off basically what's dead. I was able to do that with my nippers without the horse flinching, so I know I wasn't too short or too close. I'm going to create some decent straighter lines in my bars, and then try to create a nice even sole depth all the way around. So when the horse lands on soft ground, it will feel a little more even to them. It'd be like if you had a really thick sole on your shoe, and one part and real thin on the other. Yeah. You're gonna feel that when you walk on the ground. Horses are gonna feel that as well. I'm also gonna trim the frog for hygiene. And the reason I do that is to prevent thrush or rocks being trapped. So this is the sulcus of the frog. Because she grows a lot of heel, those sulcus tends to be a little bit tighter. Okay. So I have better luck keeping feet hygienic by trimming that out. And you can see where that's flaky, yeah, and dead between the frog there, between the commissures. Cool. So that tells me that it wants to be trimmed out. Obviously it'll grow back in, but if I continue to trim it, it'll stay healthier.
How long have these shoes been on that we just pulled?
I think this is at least about 7 weeks.
Okay.
She's about a week overdue, but she's mine, yeah. So. Yeah. And then, so that's kind of my knife work and my general nipper work to get the majority of the foot out of the way.
You can see JD makes that look pretty easy in paring out that sole, and again with the nippers, it does take practice and some time to get that level surface all the way around from toe back to heels, or heel all the way around to the other. People like to dive down on the quarter sometimes, but again, now he'll rasp that and again make it that completely.
Yep, and then we're gonna create a flatter surface. While I'm doing this, I'm always evaluating balance, and people tend to use that word very generically. What I consider balance is I want to shoe around this center of articulation, just behind the frog. I would bisect the extensor process, okay? So she's always going to have a little more toe than the heel part. I want to divide that in half. I'm also evaluating medial lateral balance as well as I'm flattening the shoe and flattening the foot.
And you can see how he lets that rasp kind of glide across the foot and really do the work itself. Some people, when you're starting out, and here he goes evaluating it, you push too hard with a rasp, it sticks, wants to hang up on that foot. Yeah, let that rasp do the work, though.
Yeah. The other thing I do is I like to, on a horse that grows a lot of heel, I like to create soft lines. These heels like to wrap around, create a nice point. Those like to trap rocks. Doesn't allow the foot to expand and contract. Okay. A lot of upright feet like this have issues because the heels tend to be tighter and they don't like to expand, meaning it's not engaging this digital cushion, which helps absorb shock. Without going into great detail about that, we'll just kind of explain why and how I'm trimming the foot that I do.
Yeah. How do you think maybe you treat this one's yours, obviously you've trimmed this horse plenty, but a horse that you haven't seen, how might you change your approach and, you know, going up? Do you watch a person ride? Do you ask them a lot more questions in terms of how they're using that horse?
So whenever I have a horse that's new to me, the best thing to do is watch the person ride it first. Then I like to watch it walk across the concrete toward me and away from me. Those are going to tell me a few different things. Not the whole story of the horse, but it's going to tell me how a horse breaks over and also how the horse likes to land. This particular horse, she's mine. I don't need to watch her walk because she hasn't changed much. She always lands a little bit on that outside. So you probably can't really tell. I actually trimmed this about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, a little lower on that outside.
Okay.
What that does is that gives me a head start to when she is when she's wanting to grow high on that outside. It's going to maintain balance throughout the shoeing period. So I'm not only going to shoe the horse for this week, but I need to pay attention to what it's going to look like in 6 weeks.
Good. Yeah, we had talked about balance from kind of that functional, watching them as they move, how they land, evaluation, as well as kind of that geometric as you have looking at it now, dorsal, palmar, medial, lateral, so that's good.
Yeah, definitely. And if a horse is breaking over one side or the other, it's fairly normal. So I don't over evaluate this lateral breakover. As horses move from the shoulder, they have to move outside themselves, almost always. Unless this frog is pointing this way or that way. And that's what watching a horse walk back and forth is going to tell me. So it's going to give me kind of an idea.
Do you think it helps you at all, JD, the fact that you ride and perform yourself and have a little bit better understanding of how things work?
Yeah, I think being able to work with a trainer, if you don't ride yourself, but being able to work with your trainer or with your client that's riding the horse, they can give you feedback of this is how the horse feels. Because I can manipulate a lot of how the horse moves. So it's going to be either a smoother ride or a rougher ride, or it's going to be choppy, things like that. We'll try to stick with just kind of how front feet move.
Good.
And an upright foot is going to have a different flight pattern than a foot that's considered a down foot or a lower heeled foot. That'll be kind of the difference between an English horse and a Western horse even. So now we can kind of move on to how we're going to apply our shoe. You can see the shape now of our white line. I'm going to kind of take a mental note of that. Now I'm going to not take into account what I consider distortion. I'm going to gather up that distortion, and I can feel that with my hands on the front of the hoof wall. Ridges or dishes in the feet. Obviously that shoe is not the same shape as this foot. So in order to put this appliance on properly, I need to be able to match the white line up with the nail holes, but also help with the breakover of the horse. Meaning I want to create a little more even breakover for this horse because she kind of is pointy and kind of has a long toe, which is going to force her to break over one side or the other. So we're going to use the shoe now to help her do her job, but I also need to fit it up properly so that it can be nailed on safely. So we're going to go over shaping of the shoes. And what ambles are kind of an amazing thing because they're going to have basically all the curves and straightness on the amble. So I'm actually using the amble to create that shape. She obviously is a lot straighter than this pattern, so I'm just going to modify this a little bit. Aluminum, I don't really need to heat it up because it's pretty soft, especially this particular shoe. You can see that branch starting to straighten up. That's a pretty decent curve. I also want to create a little bit of expansion, but not a lot on a club foot. I don't need to support a heel that grows a lot of heel. Otherwise that just creates leverage and a place for the horse to step off. The one important thing with an aluminum shoe is an aluminum shoe should just be an extension of the hoof wall. An aluminum shoe should help the horse feel like it's barefoot. Where a steel shoe, because it has other properties of stiffness and hardness, you can actually help that horse or support that horse. But if you're adding support, that's going to create leverage if you do it with aluminum as opposed to steel. So applying aluminum is quite a bit more complicated than a steel shoe because it really does need to fit the foot properly.
How's that aluminum shoe behave in that fork? Can you heat it up? Does it
You can warm it up.
Yeah.
You never want to stick it into the forge.
Yeah.
So if you were to stick it into the forge, of course, aluminum will just melt.
Yeah.
It will melt quite quickly. But you can warm it up. If I need to clip this shoe to hold it on a little better, I can do that. If I can't really nail this up, I can pull a clip. You guys will probably go over clips with Michael, so you'll kind of understand that shoe modification. Don't need to go into detail per se, but and like I said, I want this to feel like a barefoot horse. So I actually, if Gabe's running down and this horse stops and steps on this shoe and catches it pretty good, I'd rather the shoe completely come off.
Yep.
I leave a safe amount of foot on a horse where he can finish the run or she can finish the run without that front shoe on, and you probably wouldn't even notice. So that's important. The reason we just nail the shoe on is to protect the foot over regular work, being worked regular. But at a show, if that shoe were to come off, that horse would be able to go around the pen without it.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, so that's what we're kind of creating with the aluminum. So we're gonna just bring that quarter in a little. This side we're gonna straighten. This is the outside. I actually marked the inside and the outside. So you can tell that's the outside has always got the mark.
Cool.
So that side needs to be straightened in the quarter there, but it still has a little bend in that outside quarter, so I just hit it there. And then we're going to bring it all together.
How big an anvil you keep here on your truck?
This is a 125 pounder.
It's a hefty anvil.
Yep. The heavier the anvil, the easier it is to work on. It's less noisy, but of course you got to lift it in and out of the vehicle, so smaller anvils and for practicality. I don't do a lot of modifying of my toe.
Okay.
This is where we can get into debates with other horseshoers, but one reason why I don't necessarily want to put an asymmetrical toe into a shoe on a show horse is that this horse needs to look the same going to the right as it does to the left. Meaning when it's doing circles or turnarounds, that breakover pattern, flight pattern of the front feet need to match as closely as possible.
Yeah.
So what I can do with the shoe is I can support the foot, support the coffin bone inside that foot properly, but I can create a little more symmetrical breakover. That symmetrical breakover allows that horse to break over medial or laterally more evenly, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So a little more curve on the outside, maybe a little narrower, and then we're going to go check and see how our fit is. Okay, so we got our shoe shape where I'm fairly happy with it. I got the shoe flat, meaning this is a nice plane for the foot surface to match up. Now aluminum, you can't necessarily hot fit. You'll probably see that with Michael. You can't get this hot enough to really melt the foot. So I can't get an exact match between the foot and the shoe. So I need to be good with the file. I need to be good with my hammer where I don't have a ton of hammer marks in the shoe, and I can create a nice flat surface so it'll marry up to that foot nicely.
Good.
I'm gonna go ahead and do this like everyday work. I modify that process depending on the horse, but normally I would dress that foot first and nail the shoe on. But for everyday work and a horse that I maintain myself, I'm actually gonna nail up the shoe first. I have an apprentice or even myself if I'm working by myself, then do the dressing and finishing after. The shoe then gives a guideline for the apprentice to rasp that foot back, to shape up that foot, to analyze that foot from the top, to remove any of this distortion that we have. So nailing on the shoe does two things. It adds the guidance for the apprentice or myself, and then adds protection to the bottom of the foot.
Good.
So we'll go ahead and nail this on. So some other fundamental things across disciplines is I want to make sure I don't have pressure in the seat of corn or sole pressure, meaning I don't want that sole to be lower or higher than the outer hoof wall.
Yep.
So I'd like to keep that smooth. I don't want to take too much of it and scoop it out, but I need to make sure it's relieved and smooth all the way across.
Okay, good.
So I like that fit. Comes right to the heel. I can feel my boxing on the back of the shoe here with my fingernail. Gives me about a dime's width. That's about all I need.
Cool.
If I start sticking a bunch of shoe out behind that foot, that's just going to be a spot for the slider to catch or step on. And these horses are running at speed. If they step on that shoe while they're running, they could trip and fall, tear the shoe off. All those things we don't want to happen, especially during a show. My particular horse, I can put as many nails in as I want. If her shoe comes off, I can fix it myself. So I prefer the fewest amount of nails and intrusion into the foot as possible.
Good conservative approach.
Yep. Especially on the medial sides of upright feet. So the medial sides of upright feet, if you notice, tend to be a lot straighter.
Yeah.
That has to do with certain conformations, and we can go into that as well. But with that being thinner, it tends to want to break out more, and if I can not fill it with holes, the better. This shoe fits good. I could put another nail in there, but she really doesn't need it.
Why have you set the shoe back like you have?
So what I'm doing is I'm feeling this distortion. Okay, upright feet, as the heel grows, causes a crease. So if this is the heel, as the heel begins to grow, it creates a dishing effect of the front of the hoof wall. And we can look at that on the ground here. It's actually on her. This is why I wanted to use her. So if I had a straight edge, like a file, we can look at the top third of the hoof wall, hoof capsule here, and you can see where this is pretty straight.
Yeah.
And then it begins to dish, and that's how she grows. So this is also related to balance, where as the heel grows, it's going to dish. It grows like this every single time. I continue to rasp it off, trim the heel back, and quote unquote, keep balance. So, like I said, I'm using the shoe as a guideline for my apprentice or myself to, I can rasp that foot back basically all the way to that shoe, and that will get rid of my little bit of lateral distortion that was here. She flares a little to that lateral toe, and toe distortion, which needs to be maintained. Especially on reiners, if you let these heels or these toes get too long, it's going to cause a lot of stress in that deep digital flexor and navicular, on that navicular bone, navicular bursas.
Yep.
So you can cause some soft tissue injuries. Also, you can see how upright her pasterns are.
Yeah.
Not that I believe the hoof pastern angles need to match up perfectly, but we need to have, like we said again, balance. I want this hoof pastern angle to be similar, meaning this angle here bisected in the middle of the pastern to the hoof wall. Mostly I'm more concerned about the coffin bone angle, but I also need to maintain distortion. So you can kind of see what those angles look like.
Yeah. Okay.
And that'll closely or more closely match, create balance from center of gravity. So we got, if we drew a plumb line from our center of gravity here, and not getting our toe too long out in front, which is going to cause leverage.
Okay, y'all, and so we've got the front feet done on this horse. We're about to go back and nail these sliders on the back, and so we're gonna go into the arena and watch Gabe ride. We'll talk to him a little bit about what he's looking for when we're putting shoes on a horse and what he's asking of JD. And so JD's constantly working with the trainers and his clients to see what they're doing and how this horse is reacting and trying to make adjustments. And so it'll be good for you guys to see Gabe as he rides. Anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, just that we can apply shoes a little differently. We can modify those shoes or even change materials in the front end to help that horse do its job a little better, whether it's in the turnaround circles or in the stop.
Cool. So let's head into the arena.
Hi, I'm Gabe Garrison with GLG Performance Horses. This is GQ, a 4-year-old stud that we show in the reining events. He was a fraternity horse last year and we're getting ready for the derbies. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what I look for in a horse prospect, as well as how we shoe them and why we shoe them the way that we do. So to start off, when I look for a prospect, we found this guy as a coming 2-year-old. I look for a lot of conformational things, definitely straightness, really good mover, and very correct. I like short coupled horses. I like their hocks to be low. I want their neck to come out of their shoulder rather level. I don't want them U-necked, or I don't want the other extreme, which they're real high. They need to be soft and shallow in the mouth so that they're soft in the face and they can use their bodies correctly. The things I look for feet is I definitely want a nice round full foot. I don't like ones that push a lot of toe or want to be super posty. I mean, we can definitely help those horses out that are, but when I go look for prospects, I try to find those ones that are a little more correct so that we don't have to try to do a lot of fixing or a lot of correction. I know that's hard to do these days. It's almost an impossible game, but we try our best to look for prospects that way, or breed prospects that way. As far as performance reasonings for shoeing for me, I like the front ends to be done either in aluminum, or if they can go barefooted, I try to leave them barefooted if they're good-footed horses. I've got one 3-year-old now that's really good-footed, and so we leave him barefooted. The rest of my horses all go in aluminum, and I go back to my baseball playing days with aluminum bats. You know, what's better? Do you want to try to swing a steel bat, or do you want to swing aluminum? Well, of course, we want to swing aluminum. It's lighter. The other reason, it's less percussion. And when you got less percussion when their feet are landing to the ground, if they're working hard, you got less vibration going to joint capsules and joint spacing, and ligaments and tendons also are less impacted by that. So I use aluminum a lot. The other reason is for traction. Like JD discussed earlier, he likes to play. Like JD discussed earlier, traction's important with these horses. You know, as fast as we got these guys doing maneuvers these days and how physical they are and how talented they are, it's easy for them to fall out of lead if they're slipping around a lot. So aluminum allows us to have a little more traction. It allows them to get in the ground and use themselves a little more aggressively and more physical and more athletic. So those are the reasons I stick to aluminum in the fronts. The backs, we definitely use sliders in all of ours. Usually they generally get sliders about midway into their 2-year-old year. We start them around December with the groundwork and riding them by January of their 2-year-old year. And usually by March, April, they got their first set of sliders. At least that's what we hope for. Now, depending on the horse, if we have to put them on later, we can. You don't ever want to put them on too soon, because then you lose them wanting to stop. You got to let them have some confidence in using themselves, or if they're just going to the ground too aggressive on their own, we'll put on a slider a little earlier to give them that release so that they don't hurt themselves. We start off with a little 7/8 tapered slider and work our way up to whatever the horse's needs are. The bigger stoppers usually use a smaller slider. The ones that need a little more release, we put a little 1 1/4 on them and try to fill them full, but for the most part we like to stay as small as we can because they have more control with a smaller slider. JD and I work together quite a bit as far as how these horses are going to move, how they go to the ground. So when we work sliders, if we got a horse that may be spreading a little more or cutting in a little narrow, we could adjust those sliders or what kind of slider we're going to use to help that horse out biomechanically. And that allows them to be able to do their job more effectively and keep them from getting sore. We have a extensive cycle program here at our barn to keep these horses healthy. We treat them just like professional athletes. We want them to have breakdown time and build up time and peak time, and then back down to some rest time. So to keep these horses going, we keep them shod accordingly for that. We want them to peak at their optimal time. Say we got a show that we're really sticking to, that we want them to peak at, say like the World Show or the Futurity or the Derby, or the NRBC for us, it's all a big thing to have them cycle at the right time. With that, I'm going to ride this guy around and just kind of explain to you what's going on with this horse's movement and why we set up his shoes for him the way that we do, and we'll go from there. Okay. Now just go ahead and keep explaining as I'm doing stuff. Okay. So I trot my horses a lot. I like to feel for movement. I like to feel for soundness. I like to feel for suppleness. I work on my suppling drills during my trot drill. And this allows me to feel my horse and understand if he's got anything going on, whether it be a sore back or, you know, some muscle body soreness, or if he's got, you know, something going on with one of his legs. We don't know until we trot him around a little bit and feel him out and get him warmed up. So we do a lot of trotting, a lot of suppling drills so we can stretch these horses out. Also, trotting builds muscle and loping builds wind. So if I want to build a lot of muscle on a horse, I'll do a little bit more trotting. If I've got a horse that's a little bit slider framed and I need to put on a little muscle, we dang sure do something dietary wise to help with that, but then we do a lot more trotting with that horse to help him physically. Allows them to do their job more effective. So we trot quite a bit and do this suppling. During this time, like I said, I'm definitely checking for soundness. I'm checking for movement issues if it feels unrhythmic. Looking for things like that, and this horse feels really good to me. So this is when I usually start going on to my workout, and I'll start doing some loping. Now this horse is shod pretty straight up. He's got a 1-inch slider in the back because he's a big stopper. Huge stopper, so he needs more control. So we leave a smaller slider on him because a bigger slider is too much release. He'll actually quit stopping on you, or he'll get too slick and get nervous about it, and we don't want that. So we leave a little more controlled slider on him, like a 1-inch. He's had 1-inch on since about end of his 2-year-old year. Excuse me. He's 4 years old now and getting ready for the derbies. In the front end, we've got aluminum Triumph open-heeled shoe for him. This horse has got really good feet. We're blessed with this horse having been short-coupled and really good feet, so we're able to shoe him pretty much straight up. He's got his toes pulled back. JD's got his toes pulled back nice and even. He's very well balanced, and he's a good mover, so we don't have to make a lot of adjustments for him. I'll go ahead and lope off. As you can see, I like to see them where they move nice and relaxed and fluid. They round their back, drive from that inside hock, not pulling from the front end, and guide willingly. During this time, I'm still feeling out, you know, things, making sure how he feels, balance and rhythm wise. I'm making sure my suppleness is still working, and making sure he's responding to cues. I want those shoulders stood up. And this is one thing where the shoeing makes a big difference. If these horses aren't shod correctly in the front end, they cannot lope clean underneath. They'll be really rough moving. This horse picks his shoulders up really good when I pick him up and squeeze him, that his feet are up underneath of him and he's driving from behind. That way when I'm going from speed transition, he'll respond off the inside hock and slow down. Everything comes to that inside hock. If he was shod with some imbalances, he would not be able to do that, as well as the training working together. This horse is very, very correct. By driving from the inside hock, when I use the W word, this horse should be able to go to the ground rather easy. Whoa. Just like that. And that's what we're looking for. We want that soft, supple go. And when he goes to the ground, we know he's got definitely the right type of slider on, because he's able to use himself all the way through without losing control. Those are some of the things I look for biomechanically as a mover. Especially circles and stopping. As far as turnarounds go, this is where the front end has to be shod definitely correct. They've got to be able to have their feet up underneath of him. If they're pushing a lot of toe and underslung heels, their feet will hang out in front of them. Well, it makes it a lot harder for them to be able to turn around clean. If they're shod correctly, when they're standing still, a horse should be almost standing with his feet up underneath his shoulder. Ooh. He should be able to stand with his feet up underneath his shoulder, just like this. And it allows that horse to be able to use himself on the step in that turnaround. Necessarily, when we want these horses to turn around, that inside foot, whatever direction we're going, say we're going to go left, that inside foot has got to come to my foot first before he crosses over. It allows him to stand up, round his body, and use himself in the most efficient way to make a turnaround. And when they're able to do that, then they should be able to turn just like this. Ooh. Feet are staying close together, and he's able to have some rhythm, or what we call cadence for us. They've got to have that same rhythm through the whole thing, otherwise they're very choppy, not steppy, and we want steppy. We want clean and correct. An aluminum shoe definitely helps with this for grip, so that they can keep making that full athletic step. They don't lose or slip. Ooh. It just allows them to do their job as clean as they possibly can.
All right, so kind of from our introduction, I explained I'm a certified journeyman farrier and kind of what that meant. It seemed a little obscure, but what it means is that we've had some forging training, at least spent time in the fire and learning what that relationship in the forging is to the performance horse. So now we're going to forge some sliders. I'm going to put a little bit of shape into them, but I'm also going to add the nail holes safely into the foot. So lower that down. Kind of what I'm doing here is just putting a little shape into the shoe. I have a little more curve in the outside and I'll just flow to the inside. It's a subtle change. I don't want any abrupt transitions. The reason is because when the horse goes into the ground, you know, your skis, they don't have sharp lines. Everything is smooth. So now I'm thinking about what's the shape of my foot. Well, I'm fairly straight in the lateral quarter, so I'm just going to draw kind of a straight line with my nail holes there. Just create a nice straight line. I'm also fairly straight, but a little more round in the medial side. Thinking about where my foot is going to land on the other side of that shoe. Do the same thing to the other side. I just open it up a little bit, and then I'm going to sweep across for the inside branch, a little transition for the outside branch, and follow through. So I have a little bend for the outside, so I have a general shape, and then just a sweep on the inside.
You can see he's got that good red working heat there. Pretty easy to shape that shoe when it goes out of the force like that.
Yep. It's not super hot, where I create a lot of slag, meaning that scale,
Yep.
but warm enough to where I can easily move it. So same thing, I'm imagining this foot. I'm also imagining how much expansion I want, or width of the slider that I want on the foot. So there's a lot of mental gymnastics going on in my head as I'm placing my nail holes. I got to think about where I'm going to set my shoe, how far back, or how far back I'm going to set it, or how far forward I want to set it.
Yep.
As well as keeping those nail holes safe.
Is this steel punched out of a sheet? Is that what it looks like?
So these are actually bent. So as they as they create the steel that comes in bar stock,
Yep.
and then these are cut at certain lengths, and then they're turned.
Gotcha.
So they're pretty symmetrical when I start. So we'll put some holes in it. Still thinking about the shape of my foot. Making any corrections as I go. I'm not just putting it where I marked it because I might be off a little bit. So I'm checking and double checking. The rest of this is just cleanup. This move here is I'm actually forging the toe back into itself.
Okay.
What that does to the metal is it compresses it. Makes this part of the toe harder. Compresses those molecules. And then I'm going to roll that toe. This allows the shoe to give it relief as it goes into the ground. It's going to slide into the dirt and hit that base, and it allows that shoe to stay up on top. If it had a sharp edge, it would stick into the ground.
Now we're talking the opposite of traction, right?
Correct. That move there is relieving sole pressure. I want to make sure that that shoe doesn't have a bubble on the inside part of the shoe and create sole pressure. Just go over my holes one more time. I have my tools tuned for a specific nail. Which is a nail that's an appropriate size for the foot. Again, I'm seating it out, making the shoe nice and flat. I'm also going to take into account now how wide it is. I can look at an old shoe or just go off what's in my head, my memory, and then I'm going to check flat again.
Good.
Make sure that shoe is nice and flat. One thing about a slider is you don't want a slider to be tipped inward, meaning I don't want this seated out too much. Because of the size of the shoe, it can create leverage and actually contract the foot. So when the foot is landing on it, I don't want the foot to do this. I would rather the foot spread out over the shoe as the shoe lands on the ground. Okay? And then we're going to cool it. Okay, so we're going to go over just shoe fundamentals. These are going to be similarities between, across all disciplines. We're going to go over the safing, what we call safing, meaning the inside branch is either round or soft or even beveled. So when a horse steps on itself on that inside, that this isn't a sharp edge. Very important with a slider. 1/4 inch steel, it's very thin. It can get very sharp very quickly. So that's a fundamental that I put on every horse is a safed medial branch. The other thing are like heel checks. Everybody does sliders a little differently. I just take off the sharp edge. So as the shoe goes into the ground, that sharp edge isn't catching dirt and allowing the foot to catch dirt. The other thing, of course, is taking off any of the other sharp edges. This is what would be called boxing of the shoe. Again, a little bit of a heel check, not a standard heel check because it's a slider, but the fundamentals are going to be the same across disciplines. You're going to see that when Michael does his shoes the jumper, he's going to put heel checks and boxing as well on shoes. So those are fundamentals that we put on basically every shoe that goes on a foot. So we're going to just touch on a few differences in hoof prep from the front to the hind, won't go over all of it like the frog and such, because that's going to be the same. But the difference is in hind feet as opposed to front feet, those are also going to be similar across disciplines. Coffin bones tend to be more concave. I kind of equate it to a cereal bowl as opposed to a dinner plate. So those coffin bones on the bottom are going to be a little flatter on a front foot. I'm going to have more concavity in the back foot. Her feet are a little dry, so it's not going to be quite as neat. That's why I use nippers if I have to, if I can't use my knife. So same things, I'm thinking hygiene as I'm trimming. Creating balance and symmetry in my frog as well. I'm going to clean out a little bit of the sole so I can see my depth. A little dry like I said, but still we're going to create good lines with the bar, removing all the dead foot. I don't take out a bunch of sole for my hind feet. Reason is I don't want it necessarily filling up with dirt or rocks during the slide aspect, since I am going to put quite a bit more length in a normal shoe. Don't necessarily want this part of the foot filling up with dirt. I'm always thinking about balance. Does she have more toe or heel? I do shoe quite a few that have quite a bit of heel in the hind feet.
See how he takes a half bite, rocks it.
It's a little easier to rasp it down than to do it with the knife, just because the foot's a little dry. Stalls are clean here, so the horse's feet dry out pretty good. They tend to always want to flare to the lateral side. That distortion wants to move away from pressure. Center of gravity is in the middle of the horse here. Plus conformation, horses tend to toe out slightly in the hind end. You'll notice a little bit of bruising. This mare kicks a lot, actually. Surprising she even keeps her sliders on. So.
Anything you're doing different in the back end here, knowing that you're putting sliders on?
Not a whole lot. Those fundamentals are all going to be the same. I don't want to get a long toe.
Yep.
That's kind of a thing that's notorious for reiners because of the length of the shoe. Those fundamentals are just going to create longer toes. I don't need a long toe to create a good slide. You just don't. In fact, recent studies show that long toes and hind end, negative plantar angles actually create lameness. So if Ryan wants to come over and kind of look at the side here, I'm going to analyze the angles the same way we did for the front feet. I'm going to look at the slope of the pastern and the slope of my toe. Any other distortions like flaring, I'm going to try to gather up. And as I nail my shoe on, I take those into account. You can go ahead and I could put it on a stand right now and rasp off those distortions. Just for sake of time, my everyday shoeing, I tend to, as long as it's not a lot of distortion, I'll nail the shoe on first. Shoe placement is still very important. I'm always looking at a non-distorted frog, meaning that frog that is neat, tightly trimmed, not extra elongated or too close to the white line. And I'm going to kind of align this slider a little bit with that frog, but I'm also going to want to turn it a little more to the inside since this foot wants to tip to the outside. By doing that, as a horse goes into the ground, this is going to help her slide straight even though the foot is pointed outward. That's going to relieve a little stress on the hock, and that's just years of experience and learning from other farriers that have been doing reiners a long time.
Yeah.
Show me how to do that. I'm also going to use this shoe to help support any straight spots or other distortions where the heels might be rolled under. Okay, so now we're going to nail on our slider. This is what's going to be a lot different than other disciplines. Obviously nailing the slider on is a lot different, but shoe placement is going to be a little bit different. I'm taking into account how a horse turns around, how it's going to stop, how it goes into the ground at speed when it is stopping. Lots and lots of factors go into how this slider is being applied. I of course put those nail holes where I can nail it up safely. Get good high nails.
Notice his nail heads are already flush inside that shoe.
And that's another reason why I went ahead and punched them myself with my own tools that are tuned. So then I don't have to rasp those nail heads down.
You can see his nail line there.
And if I got it fit upright, it should be fairly simple to nail on. Kind of lucked out. Make sure those nails are bent over or wrung off.
Cool. Looks good.
And we're going to set that down. So we're going to look at that shoe from behind. Look at it from directly behind. You're going to see the shoe would stand square. You can kind of see even there, that's a good example of how she toes out. That's probably how she's going to go to the ground. Now with that shoe slightly pointed more towards the front foot rather than outward, that will assist in her slide.
Okay.
The other thing you're going to notice is this lateral support. That's important for the other maneuvers, doing circles and loping. What we've learned from high-speed videos of horses, watching horses move and go around, lateral support is a lot like rocking back on your skis. When you feel those skis and that support behind, you can almost lean back on them. That type of support helps that horse reach underneath, use the hind end. That's their motor. And so fitting that shoe is going to help with that. Same thing when a horse does a turnaround. You'll see that when Gabe's riding the horse. They're going to want to stick that hind foot into the ground and really turn on that hind foot. If you lack that lateral support, that horse is going to want to step out of it in what we call swapping behind, where they end up stepping around themselves in the hind end rather than kind of pivoting on that pivot foot and turning around, which is the proper way to do a turnaround. So multi-folded, why we have the shoe fit that way and how it helps the horse do its job. Okay, so now we're gonna go over our finished products and just talk a little bit about the relationship between the front end and the hind end, since we can treat them as individuals, but they all need to work together. You're going to see, we talked about earlier about that medial toe being important. You'll see how I have that inside kind of fit full, because on the foot these tend to be straighter, but that doesn't help us in our maneuvers and doing our circles. So I'm using the shoe to help the horse do its job a little better, create a little more purchase, and it also creates a little more balance for the foot, some even angles to help with weight bearing and things like that. It's good for soundness. Okay.
So we got our slider on the front. We got our front shoes on, our aluminum shoes. And so everything looks good. So we're going to talk a little bit about that white line there.
So yeah, we have the shoe on. I kind of like our break over here. I do leave a little bit of that foot hang over, but people are going to ask, hey, I can see that white line there. And you can kind of tell here that you're going to see that on a non-distorted toe or non-distorted foot. If you were to start to see that after filing, this would start to seep blood. You can tell that hoof wall is very solid still, meaning that on a clubbier foot that grows a lot of heel, they tend to dish, meaning they're going to get distortion in the toe. We're used to seeing lateral distortions or distortions in the quarters, but we don't talk a lot about distortions in the toes. So she's got bilateral clubbier feet, you're going to see that white line exposed as we rasp off that distortion. I don't take it all off because it does retain moisture, but I need to create some balance, meaning I want that breakover to be 50-50 from our center of rotation or articulation.
Cool. Well, it all looks good, y'all. So I hope you guys learned a good bit today. Okay, everyone. So we've gone through, we've trimmed and shod the front and the hind feet on this horse. We put those aluminum shoes on the front, the sliders on the back. Hopefully you guys learned a good bit about that today, and really some differences from shoeing that English sport horse and that jumper that we're looking at with Michael.